Good afternoon, and welcome to a session that promises to be as lively and as sparky as the title it carries. Brand valuation, is it brilliant, or is it bullshit? My name is Russell Parsons, and I'm the editor of Marketing Week, and it's a great pleasure to referee, if you like, this what I'm sure it will be a momentous debate. Just to put it into a little bit of context. Mark Ritson, Associate Professor at Melbourne Business School, brand consultant and columnist for Marketing Week, wrote a column for Marketing Week earlier this year where he called into question the value of brand valuations, in particular those done by the big three in alphabetical order: Brand Finance, Interbrand and Millward Brown, basically because their brand valuations differed. He called for a new way, and a new way right now. That brings us here to today, to this debate. We're going to hear from the top names at those valuation firms. We're going to hear from David Haig, who's the Chief Executive of Brand Finance, Mike Rocha, who's the Global Head of Brand Valuations at Interbrand, and Doreen Wang, who's the Head of BrandZ at Millward Brown. They're going to deliver or present the case for brand valuation being brilliant. To counter that, Mark Ritson, who's going to deliver the case for it all being bullshit. We're going to start with Mark. When we've heard from all four of them, we're going to throw it open to questions, mine and yours. You've got the Slido app. I'm hoping you're all more comfortable and familiar with it perhaps than I am. We're also, once we've got those questions, going to conclusively prove, well, today in this room anyway, whether or not it is brilliant or bullshit, because we're going to ask you to vote. Anyway, without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Mark, who's going to kick it off. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So I have 8 minutes, and my fellow valuation people have even less, so we'll get straight to it. So as Russell has said, I wrote an article, actually, about 5 years ago was the first article, and I used to write articles about the different valuations, ooh, Chanel's gone up, and ooh, Kellogg's has gone down. And I used to write the same article, and Russell didn't notice. But each year, as I began to write it more and more, I realized that perhaps the valuations were so extremely different that they might actually be, to use the key phrase of the day, bullshit. What I want to make clear before I get into it is what isn't bullshit and what I don't want to mistake myself as saying. First of all, Mike, Doreen, and David are not bullshit. They're fabulous human beings. Probably better than me. I just think what they do is bullshit, but they as human beings are lovely, wonderful people. And the fact they're here today for the first time ever together on a stage is an amazing thing. Second, brand equity is not bullshit. I believe in brand equity. I teach it to my MBA students. I work on building it and protecting it for clients. I believe in brand equity. And the theory of placing a financial value upon brand equity and saying what is a brand worth to a company is in theory something I totally also believe in. Theory is the operative word. And potentially the private valuations that these three companies do for their clients may be brilliant, or they may be bullshit. It's difficult because it's obviously done behind closed doors. What is bullshit, and what I want to make a strong argument for today as being bullshit, are the three annual valuation league tables that you will all be familiar with. We have Interbrand's Best Global Brand 2015, which we regard as the original one. We have Brand Finance's Global 500, which we regard as the bigger one, because it has 500, not 100, and therefore is 5 times better, as David will argue later. And finally, the BrandZ Top 100, which is the one that has more consumer data driving it. I'm not sure, I'm conflicted as to which is better than the others. You can decide. My premise is not to pick on one of them, but to argue that all of them are actually bullshit. Why are they bullshit? I believe they commit 3 sins. And to make it clear, look, I'm ready to be persuaded as well. I will vote with you at the end of this session. I almost hope to be persuaded that they are brilliant, because in theory I believe in it, right? So I'm ready to be turned as well. Let's see. But why do I think they're currently bullshit? They commit 3 sins. The first sin is the sin of variation. If you look across their valuations, you discover that there are outrageous differences between what these 3 firms say the same brand is worth. Variations that exceed any form of fair estimate or value. Second, the sin of denunciation. Given the enormous differences, and we are talking billions of dollars, one might expect these capitalist competitor firms to critique each other and point out why another firm's valuation is bullshit versus their own. They don't do that. They're conspicuously silent about the differences between these different approaches. And finally, the sin of deviation. If you compare what they say a brand is worth versus what is actually paid for that brand, when that happens, there are gigantic differences between what I'd argue is reality and what the valuation says is reality. Enormous differences. They're the three sins I want to talk about. So let's talk about the first, the sin of variation. The danger with marketers is they get this league table, they go, oh, look at that, that's 10, that's 12, that's 15, and they don't look at the actual system by which these brands are being valued. So that's what I've done here, and I only have time to talk about 3. We could talk about a lot more. Let me show you the variation between these valuations in the 2015 valuations. Let's take the world's biggest brand, of which all 3 firms agree upon, which is, of course, Apple, the world's most valuable brand according to the 3 firms. Interbrand says it's number 1 and it's worth $170 billion. That's the brand equity. BrandZ says it's also first and it's worth $247 billion. And Brand Finance says also first, it's worth $128 billion. Now, those of you with a quantitative background will recognize that's a fucking enormous amount of money. That's not millions of dollars. That's billions of dollars. Billions of dollars. Now, again, some of you are still not able, I think, to fully appreciate it. What is $120 or $119 billion? It's the gross domestic product of Belarus, right? Now, you might say Belarus. It's Belarus. It's a fucking huge country, right? It's got oil-rich country. It's bigger than like most other countries in Europe, right? It's 10 times the size of Scotland's economy. It's gigantic. And yet, its whole annual production is worth less than the difference between 2 of our noted brand valuation firms' estimate of the value of the world's biggest brand. How is that possible? Let's take the world's most famous brand, Coca-Cola, right? It has been for many years the world's most valuable brand. It's probably in a death spiral, but we're not here to talk about that. What is Coca-Cola's brand valuation? According to Interbrand, it's the 3rd most valuable brand, worth $78 billion. According to BrandZ, the 8th most valuable brand, worth $84 billion. According to Brand Finance, it's the 11th most valuable brand, worth only $36 billion. So, depending on who you listen to, Interbrand will tell you it's the 3rd biggest brand in the world. Brand Finance will tell you it doesn't even make it into the top 10. And they difference by a matter of twice as much. How can a valuation be half what another brand's valuation is? Of course there will be differences, but double the value? Finally, let's take a brand you all have in your pocket. Let's take Visa. According to Interbrand, Visa is worth $7 billion and is the 61st largest brand in the world. BrandZ says it's worth $92 billion and is the 5th most valuable brand in the world. You see where I'm going with this? Brand Finance say it's the 144th most valuable brand and worth 9th. That's $85 billion. Billion dollars, okay? What is $85 billion? It's 12 times more if you believe BrandZ, right? There are 12 Interbrand visas in BrandZ's single visa. How is that possible? By the way, that's also, the difference between them is 15 times Visa's net income for the year 2014. It's got to be bullshit. Not the valuation, the variation in the valuation. 15 times that company's income. Nonsense. So the sin of denunciation is my second sin. Based on these gigantic variances of $85 billion and differences of rankings, there's no, it's the 5th biggest, no, it's the 144th biggest brand in the world. One might expect one of these firms to step from the other 2 and say, you're bullshit, we have the right answer. All we hear are the same 3 excuses. Valuation is subjective. No shit. But $800 billion of subjectivity is a shed load of subjectivity. Different methodologies. We have different methodologies. Well, maybe some or all of them are broken. And finally, alternative, we valued at different dates in the year. You'd have to be valuing one of these brands in the fucking Middle Ages to explain these differences between them. So I don't think there's enough, and maybe we'll see it today, explanation of how one of these firms has got it right and the other 2 have got it wrong. My final sin, the sin of deviation. When I wrote my original columns critiquing the 3 firms, I did say, look, maybe one of them has the right time and the other 2 clocks are off, i.e. one is right and the other 2 are wrong. And what I asked for in my column was an Archimedean point, a reality measure that we could see who is getting closest to reality, an actual value that we could compare their valuations to. Well, one firm called my bluff, a company called Markables, which is a trademark firm, actually went back through history and did something very naughty. They calculated the value of a brand that was bought in a public deal in the year that it was also estimated by one of the three firms here. What was paid for a brand versus what one of these companies said the brand was worth. The real purchase price versus the valuation. Here are some highlights. Compaq was bought by Hewlett-Packard in 2002. The price paid for the brand in the deal was $1.4 billion. Interbrand said it was worth $9.8 billion. That's 7 times more than was actually paid in the same year. Amil was bought by United Health in 2012. The brand price paid was $611 million. BrandZ said it was worth half that. So they're over or they're under, but they're nowhere near. This is way off the mark. The real price versus the actual price. Troubling. And they have 160 plus instances where they've compared in the same year the valuation as stated by the firms versus what was actually paid. Now what we might expect to see, and I'm reaching my conclusion here, is let's imagine one of these firms had valued 13 brands that we also have data for. What you'd expect to see is something like this. Plus or minus 20% of what was actually paid would be the valuation if we were going to get with a really close fair value estimate, okay? 0% ironically here means you got it dead right. Plus or minus 20% means you were off, but you were there within. Let me show you how these firms have done over the last few years. Here's Millward Brown, okay? 13 observations where you'll see that Millward Brown are as likely to be 500% off with their valuation versus reality versus 20% right, okay? Their average across these 13 examples, reality versus valuation, is 98%. Now that sounds good because it's nearly 100. 100 is dead wrong, okay? 0 is the right answer. 0 is the line in the middle. You got it exactly right. 100% is way off. Having said that, they are the closest. It's a Pyrrhic victory, okay? Interbrand, reality versus valuation. 22 observations of real prices in the same year as the valuations. Interbrand managed to be off by almost 200%. 200%. And again, you'll see 500% over, minus 250% under. And finally, Brand Finance, who are the champions of doing the number of brand valuations, 127 observations versus reality, and they managed to get within 323% of the valued price. Yeah? Bullshit. So let me summarize. Imagine you want to sell your apartment, right? And you bring in the 3 most noted real estate agents in the country. You see where I'm going with this, right? The first one tells you it's worth 1.2 million quid. The next one comes in, she tells you it's worth 2.6 million quid. The third one comes in and says, fuck, it's worth 3 million quid, mate. You think you're going to make a ton of money. You put it on, doesn't sell. In the end, it goes to auction and you get 950 grand for it. You'd conclude 2 things. 1, I'm owed a shitload of money by someone. And 2, these real estates don't know what they're doing. It's bullshit. These prices are bullshit. And crucially, they're not getting any better. So, in conclusion, why is brand valuation bullshit? In practice, in theory, I love the idea. In practice, it's not fit for purpose. 1, the valuations are varying by up to $85 billion from another company's valuation. Second, none of these companies so far are pointing out why they're right and the other company's wrong, despite there being $85 billion of difference. And third, on average across the 3 firms, they are currently 300% off the average price paid for a brand versus what they said it was worth. Bullshit. And it ain't getting any better. For Remarkables, here's their variance over the last 5 years. The line is slightly heading towards 0 in accuracy, but on this calculation here, it would be 2095 before we get to a point of actual accuracy. Right, we've got a bloke in a minute telling us about getting on the moon. By the time these guys get their sums right, we'll all be living on the fucking moon, right? So, that's my argument. Thank you very much. Please vote for bullshit.
Afternoon, everyone. Interesting. So I'm delighted to be here today to discuss, a really important topic and to address some of the misconceptions that we've just heard from Mark about brand valuation. I'm actually going to address Mark's points directly in the Q&A. I just want to start, first of all, by making the positive case for brand valuation. My background, by the way, is financial. I studied economics and then trained to be a chartered accountant with Arthur Andersen. And I've been working in the area of brand and business valuation since 2002. And although I've not been formally diagnosed, I'm fairly sure I'm allergic to bullshit. So why do I think brand valuation is relevant to all of you in this room? And well, if we ask ourselves, what are we as marketers here to achieve? What are we here to achieve? I would argue that we're here to create value. to create value in our brands and create value for our customers, you also need to create, enhanced consideration, drive, net promoter score, and all of that kind of stuff. But ultimately, if you're not creating value, then presumably you're destroying value instead. And so it follows that if you want to create value, then you need to understand the mechanisms and the levers through which you can create that value through your brands. And at Interbrand, we have a particular way of thinking about it. So we think that the mechanism through which brands create value is their influence on choice, price premiums, and loyalty. And ultimately, those drive value by driving higher growth, higher profits, and lower risk. And so our methodology, the way we think about brand valuation, links to that conceptual model of value creation. There are two particular brand levers that we look at. We look at role of brand, which is the influence of brand on choice, and brand strength. So the stronger a brand, the lower the risk, essentially, and the higher the value. And by evaluating a brand on these levers, as well as kind of looking at the financial model and the margins that it's able to generate, we're able to quantify the brand value. Whether you actually believe in this particular approach or whether you kind of buy into this particular model, I would argue that you need to find a model that you do believe in.